Spiderhead is a highly advanced prison, more akin to a luxurious hotel. It's a place where science and innovation take center stage. Jeff, our protagonist, believes that their work is making the world a better place. In this facility, inmates enjoy a more relaxed lifestyle, with privileges like walks, social interactions, sentence reduction opportunities, and bonuses. However, there's a catch. Spiderhead conducts medical experiments, some of which are far from harmless. To be fair, all participation is voluntary, and every inmate has the right to decline and return to a standard prison cell. One day, Ray, an inmate, sits in a chair facing a mirrored window. Steve, the supervisor, initiates an experiment by injecting a substance into Ray's bloodstream. Shortly after, they administer the first dose of a drug to Ray, accompanied by a series of simple jokes that send Ray into fits of hysterical laughter. When the jokes take a dark turn, Ray's reaction remains the same, continuing his hysterical laughter. Morning in Spiderhead is like any other, with inmates awakened by a loudspeaker announcing their names for the day's experiments. Steve asks Jeff if he's willing to try the new N40 compound, something untested on anyone before. Jeff readily agrees. Alongside the experimental drug, another is administered to enhance the speech centers of the brain. This enables Jeff to describe his experiences in minute detail, despite a side effect limiting his vocabulary. During this time, he meets Lizzie and shares details of his walk, though he struggles to express himself fully. Everything around him, from flowers to factory pipes, fills him with profound feelings of love and admiration. In the evening, as Jeff sits in bed, he reflects on how he ended up in prison. A night of reckless joyriding while intoxicated with his friend led to the accident that changed his life forever. The N40 trials, now known as Cupid, continue the next day, but this time, Jeff is not alone. Heather, a bold and impulsive woman, quickly changes her mind about her partner after a few seconds of drug administration. Their conversation is brief, and they surrender to their desires, engaging in an intimate encounter without any concern for being observed. The drug erases their inhibitions, and the night concludes with them professing their love for each other, much to Steve's delight. Despite what transpired, Jeff continues to spend time with Lizzie, keeping the experiment's details from her and avoiding encounters with Heather. On the following day, the same Cupid drug is administered to Jeff, but this time in a double dose. Instead of Heather, an older woman joins the experiment. Sober Jeff looks at her with disgust, but as the drug enters his system, he inexplicably falls in love with her. After this peculiar experiment, Jeff asks Mark to reassign him from the kitchen, where he works alongside Lizzie, as he feels uncomfortable continuing to interact with his girlfriend. Steve brings Jeff into the laboratory, but this time Jeff finds himself on the other side of the glass. Both of his prior partners are inside the experiment room. Jeff faces a challenging decision. He must choose which girl will receive a substance known to induce intense fear and pain. However, Jeff cannot bring himself to make the choice, feeling indifferent towards both girls and not wanting harm to befall them. Ultimately, the experiment is canceled, and the girls are released, granting Jeff another Friday walk. Jeff makes another attempt to reach his girlfriend, the same companion who was with him on the night of the accident. But once again, he's greeted by her voicemail. Later in the evening, Jeff spends quality time with Lizzie, secretly devising a small Christmas surprise for her. However, as fate would have it, Jeff soon finds himself seated once more in the familiar laboratory chair, facing an imposing figure named Rogan. This hulking inmate is adorned with an array of tattoos that seem to tell their own stories. As Jeff reflects on the events involving the girls from the preceding days, he reaches a profound decision. He chooses to decline the forthcoming experiment. Much to his astonishment, there's no immediate consequence, and both he and Rogan are inexplicably released after a few minutes of silence. Jeff gradually comprehends that he and Rogan were embroiled in an unspoken competition for the affections of one of the female inmates, who was slated to select one of them for drug administration. Jeff's suspicions are confirmed when he sees Heather in Steve's office. The doctor doesn't argue with Jeff, but instead shows him a diagram illustrating planned interactions under the influence of the drug. Despite Jeff's complaints, Steve reminds him that being in Spiderhead is a privilege, and dissatisfaction could lead to a transfer to a regular prison with no hope of early release. Understanding the hint, Jeff cooperates calmly during the next session, sitting in the same room as Rogan without any outbursts. Steve grants Mark a weekend break and advises Jeff to enjoy his time on the mainland. Steve himself decides to participate in the Cupid experiment, to experience the ecstasy he has only seen in his subjects. Meanwhile, the experiments continue, with Steve warning Jeff that they will soon administer Darkenflox to the girls, as demanded by a certain committee to maintain the experiment's integrity. Jeff expresses reluctance to subject anyone to the effects of this substance, regardless of his feelings for the girls. Steve, resolute in his stance, reminds Jeff of the privileges he enjoys by cooperating. Not wanting to return to a regular prison, Jeff reluctantly agrees to administer Darkenflox to Heather. As the experiment unfolds, Heather becomes distraught and panicky. The management calmly records the data, but Jeff's comments reveal no hint of romantic feelings. The experiment appears to go according to plan, until an unforeseen error occurs. Heather loses control, seizing a sharp object to liberate herself from the torment inflicted by Darkenflox. In the midst of this chaos, Steve and Mark are preoccupied with Heather's situation. Jeff, on the other hand, notices the supervisor's misplaced keys and stumbles upon a notebook containing records of upcoming experiments. To his surprise, he also finds a lottery ticket with the same numbers as the medication names. Recognizing that Steve is no longer overseeing the experiment, Jeff seizes the opportunity to lock the safe and discreetly return the keys. He hopes to keep his discovery a secret from the doctor. Steve warns Mark that if anyone discovers what happened to Heather and he is held accountable, he will implicate everyone involved in the experiment. Meanwhile, Lizzie, participating in the experiments for the first time, undergoes Darkenflox. Afterward, she confides in Jeff, expressing uncertainty about whether Spiderhead is better than a conventional prison with stricter rules. In turn, Jeff opens up to his girlfriend, confessing that on the night of the accident, not only was his friend in the car, but also his beloved girlfriend, who tragically did not survive the ride. This deep conversation leads to Jeff and Lizzie spending the night together. Steve astutely discerns the close relationship between his subjects and decides to exploit this connection for his own gain. When Jeff arrives for the next experiment, he faces a difficult choice: administer Darkenflox to Lizzie or leave Spiderhead. Jeff initially refuses, but the doctor offers him the chance to delay the experiment until morning. When Jeff encounters the determined young man again, he brings along Lizzie's personal file. It turns out that Lizzie's crime is so terrifying to her that no amount of Darkenflox can make it worse. Steve watches with anticipation as Jeff adjusts the dosage to the maximum. However, it soon becomes evident that Jeff has other plans. He intends to experiment on Steve himself, not on his girlfriend. Mark, realizing that he too has become ensnared in Steve's manipulative scheme involving the inmates, decides to set things right. He entrusts Jeff with the remote control, sharing all the essential information provided by Steve. Jeff persuades Mark to open the main exit, granting him and Lizzie the chance to break free from the prison's confines. However, Steve seizes control of the remote and administers an overwhelming dose of Darkenflox to Lizzie, subjecting her to agonizing suffering. In a desperate move, he smashes his cell phone to prevent anyone from undoing his command. Despite enduring torment, the couple manages to overcome the effects of the medication and escapes the laboratory. Concurrently, Steve announces over the loudspeaker that due to their escape, everyone else will be sent back to regular prisons, where their once comfortable lives will come to an abrupt end. Jeff and Lizzie become the focus of a manhunt, pursued by a band of hardened criminals, including the imposing tattooed figure Rogan. These criminals seek revenge for the privileges they lost as a result of the couple's escape. Steve makes a daring attempt to flee with the medications. As police boats, alerted by Mark, approach Spiderhead, he manages to leave the facility and takes off in a small plane before the police arrive. However, his shattered remote control leads to an overdose of the medication, inducing a peculiar sense of admiration within him. Steve steers the plane toward a diminutive rocky island, perceiving it as a paradise. On the police boat, Mark watches as his former boss circles above the sea and eventually crashes into the rocks. Jeff and Lizzie successfully hijack a boat and sail away before the police can catch up, ultimately achieving their freedom and a sense of relief. Their only remorse is that Steve never devised a substance capable of granting them self-forgiveness. Thus, the movie comes to a conclusion.